Yo, what up? Welcome to my jellyfish forest. Let's talk about time signatures. If you're a musician in the Western hive mind like I am, you've dealt with these pseudo-fractions a lot. And if you're not, you've seen them in those terrible Facebook memes your music friend posts in a desperate attempt to look unique. So let's break it down real quick. In music, we have these musical units called measures, and a time signature defines how we break those measures up. We do this with two numbers stacked on top of each other. The bottom number represents the subdivision we're going to use, and the top number says how many of those subdivisions fill up the measure. So a bar of 4/4 uses 4 quarter notes, 5/8, 5/8 notes, and the only thing that changes is the length of the measure. Well, and people's attitude. But that's their problem. So on the surface, this seems like a fine way of doing things, and when the task is simple, they usually do a great job. 4/4 is a time signature that is clear and conveys what it needs to effortlessly. But as we get more and more complicated, they get less and less effective. Overall, my problems with time signatures in their current form are twofold, and the first is that they are just too vague. I compose and teach for a high school percussion ensemble, and in our show this year we have a ballad in 12/8. Let's listen to a quick sample. Okay, so this is mostly in 12/8. Each bar is separated into 4 groups of 3 through the beaming of the eighth notes. My more experienced players caught on to this pretty quickly, but my younger students, this was not obvious. They immediately started attempting to count to 12 for every bar as they've always been trained to do. When you see 4/4, you don't immediately look around for clues as to how you should break that up. Instead, you just count to 4. Considering that a time signature's only job is to define the space of the measure, this one does a fairly poor job, considering it needs additional information to properly do that. And that's the problem. While 12/8 is often split into 4 groups of 3, it doesn't have to be. It could be split into 5 plus 7, 4 plus 4 plus 4, 3 plus 2 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2, or any other combination of things. While I have seen composers literally write 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 over 8, this is an eyesore. It's not really possible in most notation software, and it still isn't as clear as it should be. So what could we do to be clearer? Well, if we recall that the bottom number is just the subdivision used to fill the bar, that number could just itself be a time signature, and we could have a bar filled up of smaller time signatures. So instead of 12/8, we could have 4/3/8. That is 4 counts of 3 groupings of eighth notes. This now gets extremely useful if you imagine a song that's in 4/4, but each beat is split up into 7, sounding like 1 dick dick to 2 dick dick to 3 dick dick to 4 dick dick to 1. Traditionally, this would be notated just in 7/8, but the problem with that is we lose the fact that the song is and should be felt in 4. I don't want 1 dick dick to 1 dick dick to 1 dick dick to 1 dick dick to 1. I want 1 dick dick to 2 dick dick to 3 dick dick to 4 dick dick to 1 dick dick to 2 dick dick to 3 dick dick to 4, which is much more relaxed and it grooves much harder despite technically being the same thing. Of course, we could notate it like this, where each beat is literally a 7-lit, but the problem with that is anyone who's used a notation software knows this would be an utter nightmare, and it would be intimidating to anyone reading it. So instead, maybe we should define this as 4/7/8. That is 4 counts, each count is 7 eighth notes, and this gives us all the information we need to properly interpret this piece. I've seen Jacob Collier mention this in an interview with June Lee, and if you like music at all, you should check it out because it's pretty cool. I'll leave a link in the description. Now, to address the elephant in the room, how would we notate something like 4/7/8? The best suggestion I have is something along the lines of this, where we have 4 smaller bars of 7/8 nested inside a bigger bar. This obviously has a lot of flaws and breaks a lot of things that we take for granted about music notation, and so it probably isn't a great system because of that. But I'll get to the limitations of notation in a minute. Regardless, let's look at a more extreme example. This is my song Breathe off my EP that I released about a year ago. Take a listen and see if you can identify the structure of what's going on. How'd you do? Think you got it? Each beat is divided into 5, and there are 5 beats per bar of the drum loop. The 5-lets are pretty quick, so we'll call this 5/16. Times 5 is then 5/5/16. But on top of that, there are 3 bars per chord change, so we could call this 3/5/5/16. Have another listen and see if you can pick that out. Now, on top of that, there are only 2 chords in the progression, so we should, following the same line of reasoning, call this 2/3/5/5/16. And now we're starting to see a problem. We can always define bigger chunks of time, we can always define smaller chunks of time, and we're starting to notice this kind of fractal-like nature of time that really is undefinable. That's why I find time signatures vague. Since the bottom number is essentially arbitrary and really is just there for convenience, we only get one variable to define a space of really infinite complexity. This brings me to my second problem with time signatures, and that is, when I try to explore this complexity, their simplicity ends up being extremely limiting. Our Western notation system just assumes that each beat will be broken up in the standard square way: eighths, sixteenths, 30-seconds. Even using triplets, which is something that's fairly common, has to be fudged with 12/8. What if I want to break up my beat differently, and why does it feel so wrong to do so? If we go back to my song Breathe, this 3/5/5/16 structure seems like it'd be almost impossible to notate with traditional notation. But when you listen to it, it doesn't sound wrong. It doesn't even sound all that wonky, despite nothing in its structure being traditional. Calling each beat 5/16 feels wrong, because they're not 16th notes, they're 5-lets. And that's the point. Our notation system works pretty well for the spaces we're used to, but there are an infinite amount of differently defined spaces which feel just as good but can't be represented well with it. And I think that's pretty lame. We have a whole nother world we could be exploring that's hidden from us by our notation system. And so, I extend the challenge to you. Make something impossible. We can do better and we can go more places. Don't let the existing system define yours. Alright, I like that. I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing. I know this is my first video, but I obviously have a lot to say, and I hope to make a bunch more of them. See you next time.